Hey, it's Judy in San Antonio, Texas, and we're continuing our lessons on the survey of the Old Testament. Let's review a little bit that we know the first five books of the Old Testament are the beginnings of the world and its history, but we just call it the beginnings, and they are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, all written by Moses. All right? And then we get 12 books that are history books of the nation of Israel until they're taken out in captivity. Well, and 70 years later when they come back. So it's Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Then we get five books of poetry and wisdom. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Now, Job was really written way back in Genesis time. So the Bible is not put in chronological order. It's put by subject matter. Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Then we have five major prophets that are long books. We're going to get 12 minor prophets that are short books. And the five long prophecies take up a lot more pages than the minor 12 do. So our five major are Isaiah. Isaiah is very important with what's happening in the world today. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, very, very important. The next step, we may be starting the next step in Ezekiel 38:39. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, also written by Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, my favorite Bible character next to Jesus. Really, really enjoyed Daniel, and he gets some really interesting revelations from God, and he's able to tell some stories of the king's dreams that have since all pretty much come true. So Daniel's very interesting to me. I had lost count many years ago how many books I've written that are Daniel. Okay, then after major prophets, after Daniel, we have 12 minors. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and the last book, Malachi. Then we have 400 years of silence before we start the New Testament. We won't review them just right now because I have so much I want to talk about today on Genesis and Exodus with what's going on in the world. It's really important to understand how these people relate to each other. So we're going to go back and pick up a few more things in Genesis. Now, the hand signals I've showed you so far, we started off with creation. Creation, fall, and that was Adam and Eve's sin in the Garden of Eden. First they were created, then they fell. Creation, fall, flood. We have Noah's flood, and where everybody died except the families inside the ark with the animals. So creation, fall, flood, nations. Why do we do this? Well, nations scatter. When they came out of the ark, they went all over to start new countries. And so that's nations 4,000 years ago. I think one day I said 6,000. Genesis starts 6,000, 4,000 from the flood onward when the nation started. So that's where we were. And then I'm going to go ahead and tell you some of the next ones. And I'm going to read them, and then I'll show them to you. You might get a piece of paper and write these down. Creation, fall, flood, nations, 4,000 years ago. They've added one more step that I did not have when I did it, and you can add it if you want to. After flood, we have the story of the Tower of Babel, where God separated their languages. So you can add that one if you want to. So it's creation, fall, flood, Babel, and then when their languages were split up, they formed nations all over the world. And that's where we are right now, 4,000 years ago. The next one we're going to do is point downward. Ur. Ur was where Abraham was called out by God to get up and follow God's leadership, and he was going to take him to a land. After Ur, we're going to form the Persian Gulf. Okay? So we have Ur, Persian Gulf off this way, and then touch your tongue, and say salt. The 4 people I'm going to name, their names will spell, the first letter will spell out salt. So Persian Gulf is salty, salt. Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah. That spells salt, so it should be easy to remember their names. Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah. And they went from Ur. Remember, we pointed to Ur, and then we get the 4 of them, and they're going to travel up and around the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Ur is right down at the bottom where they come together like this, and then they split and go up. Well, Abraham and his family will travel on up to right about here at the kind of top of those streams, and that is Haran. And they stop there for a few years, and Terah dies there and is buried there. Who is Terah? He is Abraham's father, okay? And who is Lot? Lot is Abraham's deceased brother's son, okay? And so it's Ur, Persian Gulf, salt, Sarah, Abraham, Lot, Terah, Tigris, Euphrates, Haran. Terah dies. We're putting him to sleep. Terah dies. Then we're going to go to enter Israel, okay? So we have the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, and then do another sea, Dead Sea. So Abraham's going in to the Promised Land, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea is behind him. And that's the land he's going to take as his promised land. Then face forward again and point that way, kind of off to that way. And you have the Mediterranean Sea. You know that Israel banks on the Mediterranean Sea. So it's a big, big piece of water. Mediterranean Sea, where they're starting out, Israel. And we're just going to go like Israel. Whenever we say Israel, Israel. Making kind of an I, Israel. And that's where the nation is supposed to be, between those boundaries. Mediterranean Sea. I went blank. See, Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea. That's all supposed to be Israel, okay? And then next time we'll go into Ishmael and Isaac and the family tree. So we'll be reviewing these steps. There's so much happened in Genesis that it's almost impossible to, on a survey, just to do Genesis in one lesson and then go on to Exodus, because everything that's happening today in the world stems from what happened in Genesis. From the very beginning, the fall of Adam and Eve, God has known there's going to have to be a plan to save us, and he's going to use the whole Old Testament to show us that we could never save ourselves, and there would not be enough lambs to die give their blood for us to save us. Look at how many billions of people there are on the earth right now. If we had to kill a lamb every time we did something wrong, it would be impossible. So God came up with a better plan, and he was talking about his triune self, even in the Old Testament in Genesis, when he said, let's make man in our image. So who's he talking the our It's God the Father, Jesus the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's our triune God. All three in one God. And for a child, that's a really hard concept. So I always say you get water that's liquid, you freeze it, it becomes ice, but it's still H2O. And then you heat it on the stove and it goes away into gas, and that's the Holy Spirit. It's like a gas that you can't see, but it's there working. And eventually, God comes back. Eventually, the water comes back, right? So, God, Jesus, Holy Spirit. And when he talks about his name, Elohim, in Hebrew, in Genesis, he uses a plural noun. So he's trying to tell us he's more than just God the Father. He wants us to know and be ready and looking for Jesus the Son and the Holy Spirit. We know the Spirit was hovering over the waters before he created the earth. So he was already three in one. That's a hard concept. I realize that, but it's so neat to know that the Holy Spirit can live with us, even though Jesus is up in heaven preparing a place for us on our marriage day when he takes us up there with him. Okay, so in Genesis, we had the creation. I don't want to skip any steps. And last creation was man, Adam and Eve. He gave them some rules to live by. You know, God is a organized rule type entity. He wants us to live together peacefully, love each other, and obey rules that keep us safe. Rules are not given to punish us. Rules are given us to live the most abundant life we can and safely. So he gives them rules, and the rules were you can eat of anything, you can name all the animals, anything you want. You're ruler over the garden. You're ruler over the animals. But don't eat of this tree. This one tree. Don't eat of that tree. And so that old serpent, what we call Satan, showed up one day to Eve and got her to eat of it. Then she got Adam to eat of it, and God found out, and he kicked them out of the garden, and he put guards there so they can't ever go in again. And their punishments were that women would have pain when they have children, and they would desire their husbands. Their husbands' punishment was the land wasn't going to grow beautifully and wonderfully and abundantly without any hard work. Now you're going to have weeds. You're going to have lack of rain. You're going to have to find water. You're going to have to find vitamins to put in the soil. It's going to be hard for man. It wasn't just living life easy in the garden and plucking the fruit and eating anymore. Man's going to have to work. And that old serpent, he's going to grow around on his belly. Yep, on his belly. And in the end, he will strike the heels of the woman, and he will be struck and defeated because he has no control over death, where Jesus will be put to death, return 3 days later, and be our Savior. And we can defeat death by accepting that free gift he gave us when he put himself on the cross for our sins. So now Adam and Eve, they're outside the garden, they're having to work. She's having babies, and they have two boys, Cain and Abel. And Cain kills Abel because of jealousy. And there's our first murder. We've had their first sin, and now we've had our first murder. God gives them another son, Seth, and he will be the one that we follow, his lineage from this point on, probably. And so if you go to Genesis and you find the chronology up to Noah, you will be starting with Seth. What happened to Cain? He got kicked out of the family. He has to take care of himself, and he had some kind of sign put on him so nobody could hurt him or kill him because they're probably not happy with him, you know. I mean, he killed his brother, Abel. So, then I want to show y'all this Bible. This is the best Bible I've ever had for studying. It's the Jeremiah Study Bible, and this one's so good for me because my daughter gave it to me because it's giant print. I can read it easier. My eyes have gotten so bad that there's very few books that I can read very easily. They're written so small, and my hair is driving me crazy. I must have got in a windstorm in this unwindy city. Okay, so man had children, and they lived long lives. You have to remember that the earth was kind of in an envelope at that point. They didn't really have rain yet, and people started having children and multiplying. Now, this is very interesting. If you were to write this down and figure out a timeline, that these people that had children, how long they lived and how they had that it gives their age when they had their firstborn, and then how many more years is till they die, and then a total of how long they live. And you will see with Noah that there were several generations still alive when he started building that ark. His grandfather was Methuselah, and his great grandfather, I believe, was Enoch. I may be wrong about the exact order of that, but anyway, Enoch never died. He walked with God and went on to heaven with him. And then Methuselah, which I think is his grandfather, lived longer than any man ever did, into the 900s. And Noah was Lamech's child. Lamech was Methuselah's child. And so when you start putting that together and figuring it up, and I do have a chart somewhere in this house that I did that way, you will find that both Lamech and Methuselah died the year of the flood or the year before the flood. So luckily he didn't have to shut his dad and his grandpa out of the ark. Okay, so then God has Noah build the ark to scale, and exactly the measurements he tells him to. He sends the animals to him. They go into the ark, and God shuts and locks the door. So when the rain comes, the first rain they've ever had, rain comes pounding down, and volcanoes started erupting, and it was a madhouse, and the whole earth flooded, and they were in that ark for a long time. I believe it was close to a year. And then they landed on Mount Ararat. They immediately worshiped God, and they split their three families. And Noah had three sons that were triplets, born at the same time according to the way it's given genealogy-wise. So Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they split up, moved to different parts of the world. And the one we're going to follow from here on out are Shem's descendants. Now, think about it. When people say you're against the Jews, you're anti-Semitic. That comes from the word Shem. The Shemites, you're anti-Semitic. They took the H out. So, all right. So I realize we've had a lot of this. I'm reviewing it because I want to point out some things as we get into this family history again. So they build the Tower of Babel. God's angry because they're trying to be more powerful again, trying to become God to themselves. So he fixes different languages, and they can't communicate, so they split up, and we get the nations. And this all happened 4,000 years ago, okay? And so we get nations started. Things are rolling along. You can follow Shem if you want to, find out who his kids were, where they settled, how many he had, and who were the descendants after that. And you will probably eventually get to Abraham. So our Salt, he's living way down below Babylon at the base of the Tigris-Euphrates rivers in a city called Ur. Ur. You probably have heard it called Ur of the Chaldees. The Chaldeans eventually controlled that land. So he takes his father, his wife Sarai, and he was just called Abram at that time, and his orphaned nephew Lot, their families, their animals, their slaves. Yes, there was slavery back then. And they travel up outside the Euphrates River to Haran, and they settle there for a while. And Terah dies while they're settled there till God tells them to pick up and move again. So Terah dies. So then Sarai, Abram, and Lot, and everything they have, they move on over, and they go down to the Sea of Galilee, Jordan River, Dead Sea area, and he moves around a lot in tents. He follows the water wells, and he follows the seasons, and he never settles in a town. Abram is constantly moving around from place to place, even going over into Egypt at some point and coming back. And he's just a moving around person. And remember, God promised he would have a son that would be part of this covenant. You move where I tell you to move, and I'm going to make you a great nation. And when they started all this moving around, he was 75 years old. That's 2 years older than me. I'm not having any babies. And his wife was younger than him. But when he reached 100, this is a time getting really close to the time to have the baby, he and Sarai put their thinking caps on and came up with a plan that wasn't the brightest plan in the world. She said, hey, I'm 75 years old. I'm not going to be having no baby. So she has him to sleep with her maidservant, who was an Egyptian, Hagar. And she has a baby boy, and they name it Ishmael. And he grows and grows and grows, and he's like 12, 13 years old. And Abram thinks that's the child of the covenant. And God says, no way. It's going to be you and your wife are going to have a legitimate child to be the covenant child. And so, because Sarai was jealous, she had never got pregnant, and Ishmael was the apple of his daddy's eyes, she forces him to send Hagar and her son away into the wilderness. They go, they think they're going to die. God comes to them and says, no, you will not die. And your son will have a huge nation. He will have many descendants, just like the covenant child. But he will remain a wild animal, enemy with many men forever. It's going to be a wild type people. And that's our Arabs of today. The Arabs are descended from Ishmael. And in the Quran, Ishmael is mentioned many times along with Abraham. They realize that they're part of that. They realize that. The Arabs do realize that. Okay, so then Abraham and Sarah get their names changed to Abraham instead of Abram, and Sarah instead of Sarai, and they have a son, Isaac. So we have Ishmael, Isaac, pointing to our eyes. Ishmael, Isaac. Isaac's the son of the covenant, and Abraham sends a servant back to get him a wife, and he marries Rebecca, who's a cousin on down the line. And they get married, and they have twin boys. You have Esau, who was a very hairy person, very, very hairy. He had a beard and lots of hair on him. And you had Jacob, who was smooth skinned. So our sign for Esau, Jacob. Later, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. Hence, the nation of Israel is descended from Jacob. They were twins. And Esau came out a few minutes earlier. But when he came out, Jacob was holding on to his heel. And so God said it's the one holding on to the heel that will be the way we continue this lineage, this covenant, so that the Savior of the world will come through Jacob. Jacob is a trickster. He tricks his brother out of his birthright, out of his father's last blessing, and then he runs away. He runs away to find a wife and to get away from his brother Esau, who's probably not going to be happy with him and might want to kill him. And the descendants of Esau are the Edomites, and that's the people of Jordan today, is the Edomites, are around Jordan. Okay, and so eventually Jacob marries. He works for his father-in-law for 14 years. Then he and his first wife Leah, that he was tricked into marrying, because after all, he tricked his brother out of his birthright and blessing. So he got tricked out of many years of having his love of his life, Rachel. During that time, he was tricked into marrying Leah. He had several children with her. And then finally, Rachel had a son, and it was Joseph, the man of many colors coat. His daddy made him a beautiful coat of many colors. So we put on our coat of many colors, and that's Joseph. And his brothers, 10 of them at that time, were so jealous of him. So when the dad sent Joseph to find them and make sure they were safe, because they had been out shepherding the sheep, they saw him coming and they threw him in a well. And when some traders came by, they sold him into slavery. And he was taken over to Egypt, that direction. And they told their dad, they took the coat of many colors, put animal blood on it, and told their father they found the coat. And they think an animal ate Joseph. And dad went into such mourning for his son. He had another son by Rachel. The baby was Benjamin. And so the 12 boys, 10 by anybody but Rachel, and then Rachel having Joseph and Benjamin, went on living there. But dad never recuperated. He just stayed really sad, and the boys lived to regret it. They wish they hadn't done what they did. But, you know, you do things and then you get punished for it. Or maybe you don't get punished right away, but you see it's hurting someone else and you wished you hadn't done it. Well, that's how they felt. Well, in the meantime, many, many years passed. During all that time, Joseph has been sold in Egypt to Potiphar. He was such a trusted person, he was given command, rule over Potiphar's whole house. But Potiphar had a wife who had a roving eye, and she tried to trick Joseph into bed, and he wouldn't go with her. So she lied and said he tried to rape her. And so Potiphar, of course, going to believe his wife, he sends Joseph to jail. Joseph, again, shows himself worthy, and so the head jailer kind of puts him in charge of the jail, so he has access to all the prisoners. And during this time, the Pharaoh of Egypt, which is the same as a king, he sends his baker and his wine taster. I don't know what you call that person, the one who tastes your food and your drink before you do it. Well, he sent the baker and the taster to prison. He was mad at them. And they both had a dream one night. And I'm not going to go into that, because when we get to the real study, we're going to really get down into every one of these stories in detail. But we're doing the survey now. So it comes out they had dreams. Joseph tells them what the dreams meant. One of them's going to be killed, lose his head the next day. And the other one, I think, was the wine taster. He's going to be restored to his job. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And while they were cleaning him up to take him back to his job in the palace, Joseph said, "Remember me. Tell the king how I helped you. Tell him how I helped you, and then I should get out of here. I'm not guilty of fooling around with my boss's wife." But when he got back there, he totally forgot Joseph. Totally. And so the king then had a bad dream. He wasn't sure he remembered all the details of it. But even if he did, nobody seemed to know what it meant. So he's just really worried that what did this dream mean? Then he had another one. He had two dreams, and he didn't know what either of them meant. One was about skinny cows, and one was about skinny uh, wheat, stalks of grain. And so, oh, the wine taster remembers Joseph. So they clean Joseph up, bring him, and they say, and the Pharaoh says, "Can you tell me what my dreams mean?" And Joseph says, "No, I cannot." Whoa, that wasn't an answer he should have given. But he said, "But my God can. My God can do it. I can't, but I will do it. My God will tell me." And so he heard the dreams, and he said, "Oh, this is easy. You're going to have 7 years of plenty, lots of crops, lots of rain. The Nile will produce exactly what you want it to produce. Then you're going to have 7 years. It's really bad. Nothing's going to grow. You're going to run out of food." Oh, the king says, "What am I going to do? What am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And Joseph says, "Oh, I'll tell you what you should do. You should collect all the excess during those 7 years of plenty, save it, and then sell it back to the people when the bad years come. You know, kind of do it like a tax. You grew this much, so we'll take this much from you and we'll save it, and then when we want to give it back to you, you'll have to pay for it." He ended up doing that and owning all the land in Egypt, and pretty much getting the government so filthy rich because of Joseph's plan. And Joseph was raised to second in command, only under Pharaoh. Second, like vice president, and to do the plan. So he is there so long. He's in his 30s by the time the 7 bad years come. He's now dressing like an Egyptian. He speaks their language. I mean, he was only a young teenager when he got sold. So he's learned the language. He learned their ways. He learned their laws. He's learned how to dress like them. No one would guess he was a Hebrew. No one would. And when his brothers come to buy grain, he knows who they are. They haven't changed that much, and they're still wearing Judean clothes, Hebrew clothes. And he does some tricks. When we get into the main study, you'll find out how he tests them. And it covers several trips for them. But eventually he does tell them who he is, and tells them to go back home, get his brother Benjamin and his dad, Jacob, who's now Israel, bring everything they own to Egypt, because the Pharaoh is so indebted to Joseph, he's going to give them this really great land for their sheep, because Egyptians did not like shepherds. They thought they were lowly. So get them away from the regular Egyptians, put them out there on their own land in Goshen, and let them grow their lambs and be shepherds like they've always been. And that's where Genesis kind of ends. Joseph dies and says, "Take my bones back to our land when you finally go back." And they stay 400 years. You notice 400 is going to be used a lot in this. 400 years is a very important number. So for 400 years, they're in Egypt. Several pharaohs come and go. They don't remember Joseph anymore. They don't even remember why the Hebrews are there. All they know is they keep multiplying, multiplying, multiplying. When they moved to Egypt in Genesis, there were 70 adults, and then their animals and their servants. Now they're close to 2 million, maybe 2 million. And the Pharaoh's afraid there's so many of them, they might team up with their enemies and fight them and take over Egypt. So he makes a decree that all boy babies have to be killed at birth. Well, the ladies who go attend the women when they have babies just wouldn't do it. Well, and they made some excuse that these Hebrew women were stronger. They had the babies before we even get there. We don't even know what they had. So the king was angry, and he made another law. All boy babies will be drowned in the Nile River at birth. Well, there was one mama who didn't believe in that at all. She saw that her son, her baby boy, was very healthy, and she thought, I'll just hide him. And so she hid him for many months. And he got too big, started making noise. Wasn't going to last long till people were going to know she'd done that. And so she built a little basket out of reeds and sent it to the Nile River and had the big sister kind of keep watch over it. And one day, while it was out there, the princess came to take a bath. She's Pharaoh's daughter. And she fell in love with that baby and she wanted to keep it. She knew he's a Hebrew, but he was so adorable. You know how little babies are. And so the sister comes forward and said, "Hey, you want me to find maybe one of the Hebrew ladies that could, what is it called, breastfeed your baby?" Because remember, supposedly all their babies were dying, so they had milk. And she said, "Oh, yes, would you do that for me?" So Miriam, the big sister, goes and gets her a real mother, and she gets to raise Moses herself until he's through breastfeeding. And then he goes to live in the palace with the Pharaoh and all of his children and his grandchildren, like one big happy family. He gets the best clothes. He gets the best food. He gets the best education. He knows how to talk their language. He knows how to be regal like a king. And then one day when he's around 40 years old, he's outside and he notices an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. And he knew he was Hebrew. They hadn't kept that from him. I imagine his mama and his big sister had told him when he was growing up, "Remember, you're one of us." And so he killed the Egyptian and he buried him in the sand. And he thought nobody saw it. And the next day when two Hebrews were fighting, he tries to break up the fight. They say, "You going to kill us now like you did the Egyptian?" And he's like, "They know. If word gets out, they'll arrest me. I'll be put in prison or worse, killed." So he runs away and he runs to Midian. Midian is in the desert and he hooks up with a guy who's a shepherd there, Jethro, and he falls in love with Jethro's daughter and marries her, and he continues living in Midian, being a Midianite, supposedly, for another 40 years. He's no spring chicken when he goes on this journey back to Egypt, let me tell you that. And so one day he's up on the mountain. Can you guess what that mountain is? It was the very mountain where Abraham was told to sacrifice his son Isaac, but God said, "I'll provide the lamb," and he provided Jesus instead years later. The same mountain, and it's also the same mountain that we will see later that they get the 10 Commandments on. So this is God's holy mountain. And so he's on the mountain with the sheep and he sees this bush burning. It's on fire, but it's not burning up. It still has its shape. It just fire, fire, fire. It's not spreading to the grass. Fire, fire, fire. So then he hears a voice as he approaches to try to make out this mystery. He hears the voice, "Moses, take off your shoes. You're on holy ground." So he takes off his sandals and he approaches. And God said, "Moses, I see my people in Egypt. They are slaves and they've cried out for saving, and I've heard them. And I'm going to save my people in Egypt and take them back to the promised land." And reluctant Moses said, "Yeah, okay, do that, but you don't need me." And he said, "No, I don't need you, but you need me. You're going to be the one I speak through. You're going to be the one I do miracles through. You will get with your real brother, Aaron, and the two of you are going to go talk to the Pharaoh and get the people set free." And he says, "Well, what if they don't believe me?" He said, "Throw your stick down, your staff." So he throws it down, it becomes a snake. "Ah, you're scared." And then God says, "Pick it up." He reaches down, he picks it up, and it becomes his staff again. "Show them that sign and they'll believe you." So he starts the journey back to Egypt, reluctantly. But he does it. He's obedient. We got to give him credit for that. And he's 80 years old too. So he's no spring chicken. And God sends Aaron out to meet him. And they go to the elders and talk to them. And they're a little bit reluctant too. But okay, let's do this thing. So he goes then to the Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go." And we'll have some other symbols to add to some of those others we did, but I don't want to give you too many at once because it can get overpowering. Yeah, I wish this hair was not sticking out like that. I have to look at myself all the time I'm talking. Isn't that sad? Okay, so they go and talk to Pharaoh. He says, no, no, no. Now, there was something in this Jeremiah Bible that I wanted to read to you about the Egyptians and how they have many, many gods. Some people have said that all the plagues were attacking the Egyptian gods. But that's not quite true. A bunch of them did, but not all of them did. And there was a little paragraph that named a bunch of their gods. They had 80 gods in all. Bunches and bunches of animals. Bunches and bunches of animals. I thought I could find that real quick. I thought I'd memorized this so well, what was what. Yeah, here it is. The Egyptians were an exceedingly meaning many, theistic people with as many as 80 different gods. And they had gods everywhere. In fact, almost every living creature we can name was in some sense a god. Lion, ox, ram, wolf, dog, cat, vulture, falcon, hippopotamus, crocodile, cobra, dolphin, different kinds of fish and trees, small animals including the frog, and even some insects such as the locust and the scarab beetle. When I was a school teacher, I borrowed this stuff from King Tut's tomb. It was replicas of stuff they found, and a scarab beetle was there as one of their gods. It is a mistake to say that each plague was an attack on an Egyptian deity. The Egyptians did not worship lice, gnats, or flies. However, all the plagues did attack the role of Pharaoh as the one in control, a son of the gods. So we now come to a cycle. Aaron and Moses go to Pharaoh, beg to let the people go. He says no, and a plague happens. And during the plague, he relents and says they can go. And then once the plague goes away, he says no again, and then they bring another plague, and he relents, takes it back. And this cycle 10 times, till the 10th plague works. The first one, he turned the Nile to blood. Some people said that was a annual thing, that the water in the Nile, because of a substance in it, and the river would turn over, it would turn it that way. But even the water that they had pre-collected in whatever containers they had, and their feeding troughs and stuff, their drinking water in their house, every bit of the water in the land turned to blood. So God was attacking the Nile River, because without the Nile River, Egypt was nothing. All their food was grown within so many miles of the Nile River, because the Nile River would overflow each year and fertilize the land. Outside that little piece of greenness around the Nile River is just desert, like we see today in Saudi Arabia and all those Arab countries. Nothing would grow. So the Nile River was really, really, really important to them. Then the second plague was frogs. Again, frogs were a god. But this time they brought death. So that was not a happy thing. Now, the king, the pharaohs, magicians, could turn water into blood through trickery and could produce frogs, but not in the multitude of ways that God did it. not to where it made it devastating, and they certainly couldn't turn the water in the baskets in the whole Nile River into blood, just parts of it. Okay, then after that, the third plague was lice, and that they're very clean people, the Egyptians are, and that lice went on man and beast. So can you imagine? All you have to do is say lice, and my hands go like this. When I was a teacher, I watch everybody's hands. If they ever go to their head, I would have them check for lice because it is not a fun thing to have. It's itchy, itchy, itchy. And so the man and the beast all got lice. Uh, the magicians tried to bring forth lice and they couldn't. So they reached their limit. And the people are starting to say, we kind of believe this God's for real. He means business. And so they start wanting to take precautions. Then the fourth one is flies. And you know how flies, if they're very thick around, you can't eat, you can't do anything. It's pesty. And so they hated that. And so Pharaoh relented, and then he took it back. The next one was the livestock. Their wealth was determined by how many livestock they had. And so with the water, when it was turned to blood, their crops weren't going to grow too good, but then it went back to water. But now their wealth, it's like our property. Our property is where we count our wealth. How many houses do we have? How many cars? How much money in the bank? Well, so God is now attacking their economic system. And so the livestock started getting diseased and dying. Didn't happen in Goshen. Theirs didn't die. And then he relented, and then man and beast got boils. The ones that hadn't died yet got boils, and boils are icky sores that fester and ooze. And so he relented, and then he took it back again. The seventh was hail. We're still going after the economic thing, right? All right? Because the boils and the disease were attacking the livestock and the men, and now hail is going to knock down all the crops and beat it to a pulp, can destroy their homes, and if you walk out in it, you can get brained, you can get hurt. So again, he relented, and then he took it back. The eighth plague was locusts. They will eat any remaining things on the trees or the branches or anything. If the hail didn't knock it off, they cleaned it. These locusts, they come in as black swarms, and they just swarm in. They cover something, and when they swarm to somewhere else, there's nothing left. They eat it all. And so their locusts attacked every crop they had. And then, I think this one's very symbolic of Jesus, the ninth plague, darkness. All day for 3 days, they were in such darkness. And Pharaoh took him 3 days to decide to let him to go and relent. And then when they got light back, he took it back again. And he's going to regret that. Think about who was in the darkness for 3 days after he was crucified for our sins. Jesus. He went into the darkness for 3 days and then came back. All right. So we're still pointing to Jesus. The last one is the Passover. Now I'm going to ask my thing. I meant to look this up before, and I forgot to look it up. So I'm going to do it now. What year is this? What year is this on the Jewish calendar? Come on, Google. What year is this on the Jewish calendar? I think it's 5,000 something. Well, it wasn't answering me. Well, I am sorry, but this is not telling me. Google normally will give me that. Oh, yeah, 5783. 5783. Okay, so the day of the Passover is the first month of the year, Aviv, and the 14th day is when the Passover supper is started celebrating. 14th to the 21st. During those 7 days, they're not allowed to have any leavened bread. They have to get it out of their house. Okay, so the Passover, they were told to take a perfect lamb and drain it of its blood. Do not break any bones. Take the blood and put it on the sides of your doorway and across the top. You are to eat. You're supposed to roast the lamb, have unleavened bread, eat it with your cloak tucked into your belt, standing up. You're supposed to be ready to leave, because this time when the last plague happens, you need to get out of Dodge quick, or out of Egypt quick. And so that night at midnight, God comes and takes the firstborn of every family. Remember that normally the Pharaoh is the firstborn. So he may have had a brother who had already died because he wasn't killed, but his son was. And they heard such crying and mourning in Egypt. It makes me think of what we heard on October 7th, the crying and the mourning for the lost. And Pharaoh said, "Go, take your stuff and go." And the people were so glad they were leaving. They started giving them gold and silver and all kinds of stuff. So the 2,000 or more people left Egypt. And God led them with a cloud of dust by day, so they're following him, and at night with a flame, a cloud of flame. They would travel at night too during those 40 years. They wouldn't just always just at dark stop. They followed the cloud until the cloud stopped, and that's when they would settle down. And so God is leading them away from the Philistines, which would have been the A to B track to get out of Egypt over to Israel, the promised land. But he knows the Philistines are powerful army type people, and these 2 million people had been slaves for 400 years. They didn't know how to fight. They knew how to build pyramids. They knew how to take care of sheep. So he led them the long way around to the Red Sea. And he had them settle down for the night. And in the meantime, Pharaoh changed his mind. And he got in his chariot and he got all of his army, and they chased the Israelites, and they were going to force them to come back or kill them. Probably killed them since they had lost their firstborn. And God told Moses to raise his arm with his staff, and the Nile River, the Red Sea, parted, and it was dry land, wasn't even muddy. And so the people crossed. It took them all night. They crossed the Red Sea, as long as Moses kept his hand up, and then when they got across there, the water came back down, and they built an altar and worshiped God. But I left out a part. Pharaoh sees them in the split of the Red Sea, and he and his army charged right through. And as they get down into the middle of where the Red Sea used to be, but it's dry land now, the Israelites are on the other side completely. The water comes tumbling down. And if you've ever seen Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandment movie, it's awesome the way you see that water just up there flowing around, then it comes tumbling down. And we'll stop there for today and see what happens after this. But this survey of Exodus is very exciting, as the survey of Genesis was very informative of how people all came to be, and how how they went from creation to Egypt, how they ended up there, and about the flood and all that. So Genesis has so much information, and when you get down to a verse on verse study of it, I think you're going to love it. And then Exodus, you could spend that much time too. And if you get a chance to go see or to download the Ten Commandments, do it. Now, it's not all totally biblically correct. They have to do Hollywood, right? But it really is interesting. Very, very interesting. And so we will stop there. And next time we'll continue at this spot. It probably won't take as long to do Exodus next time because we'll start right here. And those plagues, I've done them twice now. They take a long time, but I felt like it was important to go back and get about the Edomites and get about Cain's people and how that all comes into the hatred of the Jews right now. That all these people surrounding Israel and hating on them and wanting that tiny little stretch of land that in some places is, I think, 30 miles across, maybe. It's not as big as New Hampshire, I heard. New Jersey, not as big as New Jersey, or about the same size as New Jersey. That all these huge, mammoth nations that have so much land, they want that one tiny little strip. And you wonder, why do they want that tiny little strip so badly? Well, I had a map here I wanted to show you, and I thought it was right here. Must have been at the start of Genesis. When you see all the land they have and the tiny little bit that is Israel, it makes you think they're just being selfish. That they can't let the Jews have at least one little piece of land for themselves that's no bigger than New Jersey. But I seem to have lost my map. Maybe I'll find it before next time because it's really cool. There it is, just past it. It's really cool to see how much land they have. Why do they have to have the Jews' land? Well, I found it and was flipping it, and then it went away again. I'll find it for next time. Or you can go get your own map and look it up. They're showing them a bunch on TV right now. They're showing a bunch of the maps, and you can just see this tiny little spot on the Mediterranean that's Israel and how they're surrounded by everybody else who are out to get them. Pray for the peace of Israel. Thank you for joining me today. Hope to see you again soon. It's been a while because of what's been going on. I just didn't feel like coming on for a while, and I wanted to do